I recreated my parents' first ever date to surprise them with a perfect romantic night, then slid them a stack of papers and watched their faces drop in horror. My parents divorced 5 years ago when my mother cheated, but even from day one, I never fully believed that story. Mom and Dad always seemed way too in love to be unfaithful. Even after they split, Mom still came around pretty often to check in or have coffee with my dad. They joked around and acted friendly enough to confuse anyone who saw them together. To me, it felt like they still had unfinished business. A few weeks ago, my dad asked me to check something on his laptop while he was fixing dinner. He left his phone synced to his computer, so texts popped up on his screen constantly. Usually I ignored them, but one caught my eye from my mom. "Can't wait to see you soon. It'll be just like old times." My heart leapt into my throat. That message was more than friendly. It sounded exactly like the way they used to talk before everything went wrong. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I got obsessed with the idea that maybe they secretly missed each other. Maybe they were finally realizing they made a huge mistake. I was 16, and I'd missed having a real family more than anything. I decided I was going to help them get back together whether they realized it or not. Their first date had been right here in this house. Spaghetti dinner, candlelight, Sinatra records spinning on the old stereo. I figured I could recreate it perfectly. My dad lived in our original family home, and my mom still had keys. I told her I needed help with a school project and begged my dad to keep the evening free because I wanted a father-son dinner. Neither of them suspected anything. In the days leading up to it, I got more confident. I felt sure they'd fall right back into old habits once they saw what I'd done. But while cleaning out the dining room to set things up, I found something weird tucked away behind the photo albums on the bookshelf. It was a stack of papers from a real estate company, offers, emails, agreements about selling our house. My stomach sank instantly. My dad had never mentioned moving. I felt panicked and confused. I searched more thoroughly when he wasn't home and found even worse things. There were applications for boarding schools hidden in his desk drawer, one in Massachusetts near my mom, another in Florida where it seemed like my dad planned to move. They'd written notes to each other about how to break it to him gently, and once everything was set, I realized with a sickening feeling they'd been secretly planning this for months. I couldn't believe it. I dug deeper into my dad's computer. There I found emails about new relationships both of my parents had, serious ones, people I'd never even heard of. They planned to each buy apartments and move in with their new partners right after selling our home and shipping me off to school. My chest ached with betrayal and embarrassment at my stupid dinner plan. I wanted to cancel everything at first, but instead, I decided that they deserved to know I'd found out, and in the most badass way possible. I printed every email, every application, and every text. I prepared everything. When they both arrived, they looked stunned to see the candles and hear Sinatra playing softly. My mom smiled nervously. My dad frowned. "What's this?" he asked suspiciously. "Oh, it's nothing," I replied, telling them to sit down. And right as they did, I sat with them too, and wasting no time, I pushed the stack of papers towards them. My hands were shaking so badly I had to keep them under the table. Neither of them said anything at first, but my mom looked sick, and my dad's jaw tightened. Quietly, I said, "I know what you've been planning behind my back." They tried to stay calm at first, saying this was all for my benefit and that I'd understand when I was older. That's when I dropped my final card. I already called Grandma. She still owns part of this house and said she'll never let you sell it. That was a bluff, but I had to play it. The room went completely silent, and then my dad exploded. He shouted at me, calling me selfish and manipulative. My mom jumped in, tears in her eyes, saying that I was the reason they'd divorced, that having me had ruined their marriage. I stared at her, too shocked to speak, but then it got worse. They kept going, their words getting nastier. They said I was an accident, that neither of them ever wanted kids, and I'd destroyed their marriage from day one. I tried to argue back, but my voice broke and the room spun around me. Their words cut deep, tearing apart everything I'd ever believed about my family. I couldn't take any more. My throat tightened. I stood up, knocking the chair over behind me, and ran upstairs. My dad yelled after me that Grandma wouldn't stop anything, that they'd make sure the house was sold no matter what. I slammed my bedroom door shut and collapsed on my bed, sobbing harder than I ever had before. I could taste salt and snot, my whole body shaking with the force of my crying. I stayed in my room for hours that night. My parents didn't even try to check on me. I heard them downstairs arguing about damage control and timelines. At one point, I heard my mom on the phone with someone, probably Nathan, complaining about the situation. They were already moving forward with their plans. The next morning, my dad knocked on my door and told me to pack a bag. His voice was cold, businesslike. He said I was going to boarding school immediately, and they'd already called to arrange early admission. I refused to open the door. I told him I wasn't going anywhere. He got angry and said I didn't have a choice, that I was still a minor and had to do what they said. That's when I realized I needed help fast. I waited until I heard him leave for work, his car engine fading down the street, and snuck downstairs to grab the house phone. My mom was in the kitchen making coffee like nothing had happened. She didn't even look at me. The familiar smell of her vanilla creamer made my stomach turn. I called my grandma from the bathroom with the water running. She answered on the third ring, and I broke down crying as soon as I heard her voice. She'd always been my safe place, the one who actually wanted to hear about my day. I told her everything about the house sale and the boarding school plans. She went quiet for a long time. Then she said she'd be over that afternoon and we'd figure this out together. Her voice was steel when she added, "Don't let them take you anywhere." My mom must have heard me on the phone because she was waiting outside the bathroom when I came out. She grabbed my arm hard enough to leave marks and told me I was making a huge mistake. She said Grandma couldn't help me, and I was only making things worse for myself. Her perfectly manicured nails dug into my skin. I pulled away from her and ran back to my room, locking the door behind me. I spent the morning going through more of their papers. I found documents that looked official with signatures I didn't recognize. Some of them had my grandma's name on them, but the signature looked nothing like hers. I'd seen her sign birthday cards enough times to know her handwriting. My hands started shaking again. Were they really forging documents to sell the house? The house that had been in our family for 3 generations? I took photos of everything with my phone, emailing them to myself and to an old email account I'd forgotten about, just in case they tried to delete the evidence. Around noon, my dad came home unexpectedly. I heard his car pull up in the driveway, the familiar sound of his engine cutting off, followed by the slam of his car door. My heart started racing as I quickly hid the papers under my mattress, smoothing the bedspread to hide any telltale lumps. He knocked on my door again, harder this time, each huge rap making me flinch. When I didn't answer, he used his key to unlock it. I'd forgotten he had one. He stood in my doorway looking tired and angry, his tie loosened and his usually neat hair disheveled. He told me to get dressed because we were leaving for the school tour in an hour. I said I wasn't going. He grabbed my arm and pulled me off the bed. Not hard enough to really hurt, but firm enough to scare me. That's when we heard a car in the driveway. My grandma had arrived early. My dad's face went pale, the color draining from his cheeks like water from a sink. He let go of my arm and rushed downstairs, taking the steps 2 at a time. I followed close behind, my socks sliding on the hardwood floor. My grandma was already at the front door when my mom opened it. Grandma looked older than I remembered, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, new lines around her eyes, but her eyes were sharp and angry, blazing with a fury I'd rarely seen. She pushed past my mom without saying hello and came straight to me. She hugged me tight and whispered that everything would be okay, her familiar perfume wrapping around me like a protective shield. My parents tried to act normal at first. They offered her coffee and said this was all a misunderstanding. My grandma wasn't buying it. She sat down at the kitchen table and told them to explain why they were selling her house without permission. My dad said she'd signed the papers months ago. That's when I pulled out my phone and showed her the photos of the forged signatures. Her face went red, a deep crimson spreading from her neck to her cheeks. She stood up so fast her chair scraped against the floor, the sound cutting through the tense silence. The argument that followed was intense. My grandma accused them of fraud and elder abuse. My parents kept insisting the signatures were real. They said she was getting confused in her old age. That made her even angrier. She pulled out her phone and called someone. I couldn't hear who, but she used her lawyer voice, the one she used when she worked as a paralegal before retiring. My parents exchanged worried looks, their confident facades beginning to crack. After she hung up, she told them her attorney would be reviewing all the documents. She also said she was taking me home with her until this was sorted out. My mom started crying, saying they were just trying to give me a better life. My dad accused Grandma of poisoning me against them. The whole time I just sat there feeling numb. These people screaming at each other didn't feel like my family anymore. My parents refused to let me leave with Grandma. They said they had custody and she couldn't just take me. Grandma said she'd call the police if she had to. The tension in the room was suffocating, pressing down on all of us like a physical weight. Finally, my dad said I could go for one night, but I had to be back tomorrow. He made it sound like he was doing us a favor. I ran upstairs to pack while they kept arguing. I grabbed clothes and my laptop and the stack of evidence I'd collected. I could hear them downstairs still going at it, their voices rising and falling like waves. My mom was sobbing now, saying we were ruining everything. My dad kept talking about timelines and contracts. I felt sick listening to them talk about me like I was a problem to be solved instead of their son. I zipped up my bag and headed back downstairs. Grandma was waiting by the door with her keys in hand. My parents stood together looking defeated but angry. My dad told me this wasn't over. My mom just stared at me with red eyes. I wanted to say something, but no words came. Grandma put her hand on my shoulder and guided me outside. The fresh air felt good after being trapped in that house all morning. The drive to Grandma's house was quiet. She lived about 20 minutes away in a smaller house she'd bought after Grandpa died. I'd spent countless weekends there as a kid. It still smelled like cinnamon and old books. She made me a sandwich and we sat at her kitchen table. She asked me to tell her everything from the beginning, so I did. I told her about finding the papers and the emails about their new relationships. I told her about the boarding school applications and their plan to sell the house. She listened without interrupting, her hands wrapped around her coffee mug. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she told me the house was special. My great-grandparents had built it in 1952. She and my grandpa had raised my dad there. When Grandpa died, he'd left the house to both her and my dad, with the understanding it would stay in the family. She'd never signed any papers to sell it. She was certain of that. The more she talked, the angrier she got. That afternoon, her lawyer came over. His name was Walter, and he looked serious in his gray suit. He reviewed all the photos I'd taken of the documents. He kept shaking his head and making notes on a yellow legal pad. After an hour, he said there was definitely something illegal going on. The signatures were clearly forged, and some of the documents had been altered. He said we needed the originals to build a strong case. He also said I should stay with Grandma for now for my own safety. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my parents and how much they must hate me. I thought about all the times they'd seemed happy when I was younger. Had it all been an act? Were they really that miserable being parents? I cried into my pillow trying to be quiet so Grandma wouldn't hear, but she must have because she came in and sat on my bed. She rubbed my back like she used to when I was little and told me none of this was my fault. The next morning, my phone was blowing up with texts from my parents. They demanded I come home immediately. They threatened to call the police and report me as a runaway. They said I was being manipulated by Grandma. I showed her the messages and she just shook her head. She called Walter again and he said to document everything but not to respond. He was working on getting a temporary order to keep me safe while we sorted out the house situation. Around lunchtime, my dad showed up at Grandma's door. He was with a woman I didn't recognize. She was tall with blonde hair and looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine. This must be Sandra. They demanded I come with them. Grandma stood in the doorway blocking their path. She told them to leave or she'd call the police. My dad tried to push past her, but Sandra held him back. She said something to him I couldn't hear. They argued for a few minutes, then left. I watched from the window as they drove away. Sandra was driving a white BMW and my dad looked furious in the passenger seat. I wondered what she'd said to make him leave. Grandma locked the door and put a chair against it just in case. She looked worried but tried to hide it. She made us tea and we sat in the living room pretending to watch TV. Neither of us could focus on the show. That afternoon, things got worse. My mom called Grandma's landline over and over. When Grandma finally answered, my mom screamed at her. I could hear her from across the room. She accused Grandma of kidnapping me and said she'd ruin her life. Grandma stayed calm and said everything would go through lawyers from now on. My mom hung up on her. 5 minutes later, she called back. This went on for an hour until Grandma unplugged the phone. We needed those original documents to prove the forgery. The problem was they were still at my dad's house. I knew where he kept important papers in a filing cabinet in his office, but there was no way to get them with my parents watching everything. Then I remembered something. My friend Justin's older sister Heather worked for a cleaning service. They cleaned our house every other week. Tomorrow was their regular day. I texted Heather from Grandma's phone explaining I'd left something important in my room. I asked if she could grab it for me when she cleaned tomorrow. She said she'd try, try, but couldn't promise anything. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. I deleted the texts after she agreed, just in case my parents checked Grandma's phone somehow. That night, we ordered pizza and tried to act normal. Grandma told me stories about my dad when he was young, how he'd been a sweet kid who loved building model airplanes. It was hard to connect that boy with the man who'd screamed at me 2 days ago. She said people sometimes lose their way when they're unhappy. That didn't make what they were doing okay, but it helped me understand a little. The next morning, Walter called with news. He'd filed paperwork to challenge the house sale based on the forged signatures. He'd also gotten a temporary order saying I could stay with Grandma while things were sorted out. My parents couldn't force me to go to boarding school yet. It was a small victory, but it felt huge. Grandma hugged me and we both cried a little. Around noon, Heather texted that she was at the house. My parents were both there watching her clean. She couldn't get to the office without raising suspicion. I felt defeated. Then she sent another text. She'd overheard them arguing about meeting with their real estate agent later. They'd both be gone for at least an hour. This was our chance. Grandma didn't want me going back there, but I insisted. I knew exactly where to look and could be in and out fast. She finally agreed, but said she was coming with me. We waited until Heather confirmed my parents had left. Then we drove over quickly. My hands were sweating as I used my key to get in. The house felt different now, cold and unwelcoming. I ran straight to my dad's office while Grandma kept watch. The filing cabinet was locked, but I knew where he hid the key. I found the folder labeled house documents and grabbed the whole thing. I also took the boarding school applications from his desk. On my way out, I stopped in my room and grabbed some more clothes and my favorite books. Who knew when I'd be back here again? We were almost to the car when my dad's car pulled into the driveway. They were back early. My heart pounded as we ducked behind the garage. I could hear them arguing as they got out of the car. Something about the real estate agent canceling last minute. They went inside through the front door. Grandma and I crept to her car and drove away as quietly as possible. Back at Grandma's house, we went through the documents. Walter was right about the forgeries. Side by side with real examples of Grandma's signature, the fakes were obvious. There were also emails between my parents and someone named Nathan about expediting the sale. This must be Mom's new boyfriend. He apparently had connections that could push the paperwork through faster than normal. It was all there in black and white. Walter came over that evening to review everything. He said this was enough to stop the sale and possibly press criminal charges. He asked if that's what we wanted to do. Grandma looked at me. I thought about my parents and how they'd hurt me, but I also thought about the good times we'd had. I told Walter to do whatever it took to save the house, but I didn't want my parents going to jail. He said he'd see what he could do. The next few days were tense. My parents tried everything to get me back. They showed up at Grandma's house multiple times. They called Walter's office making threats. They even had their new partners call trying to smooth things over. Sandra left a voicemail saying she understood I was upset, but running away wasn't the answer. Nathan sent flowers with a card about looking forward to being my stepfather. I threw them in the trash. Then my parents changed tactics. They started being nice. My mom sent texts saying she was sorry and just wanted to talk. My dad left voicemails about missing me and wanting to work things out. For a moment, I almost believed them. Then Heather told me she'd overheard them at the house talking about their lawyer saying they needed to look sympathetic. It was all an act. Again. Friday morning, we got word that the house sale had been officially blocked. The real estate company pulled out when Walter sent them evidence of the forged documents. They didn't want any part of potential fraud. My parents were furious. My dad called Grandma screaming about lawsuits and ruining his life. She hung up on him. An hour later, a process server showed up with papers. My parents were suing for full custody and demanding I return home immediately. Walter said not to worry. The evidence we had would help our case. But he also warned that family court could be unpredictable. Judges usually wanted kids with their parents. We needed to be prepared for a fight. He suggested I write down everything that had happened. Every detail I could remember about finding the documents and what my parents had said. It took me hours, but I wrote it all down. That weekend was quiet. Too quiet. My parents didn't call or show up. It made me nervous. Grandma tried to keep me distracted with movies and baking cookies, but I couldn't shake the feeling something was coming. I was right. Sunday night, Heather texted me. She'd been at the house cleaning again and overheard my parents on a conference call. They were planning something for Monday morning, but she couldn't hear what. I barely slept that night. Every car that drove by made me jump. Every noise sounded like someone at the door. Grandma stayed up with me playing cards and telling stories. She was worried too, but tried not to show it. When the sun finally came up, we were both exhausted. We made coffee and waited for whatever was coming. At exactly 9 a.m., there was a knock at the door. Not my parents this time, but two people in suits with badges. Child Protective Services. They said they'd received a report about an unsafe living situation and needed to investigate. My stomach dropped. Grandma let them in, but called Walter immediately. He said to cooperate, but not to let them take me anywhere without a court order. The CPS workers looked around the house asking questions. Was I being fed properly? Did I have my own room? Was I going to school? They seemed surprised to find everything was fine. I had my own room with all my stuff. The fridge was full of food. Grandma had already enrolled me in the local school starting next week. One of them pulled me aside and asked if I felt safe. I told her I'd never felt safer. They left after an hour saying they found no concerns, but they warned another complaint could trigger a more thorough investigation. After they gone, Grandma called Walter again. He said this was a common tactic in custody disputes. My parents were trying to make Grandma look unfit. He'd file a complaint about false reporting. It might not stop them, but it would create a paper trail. That afternoon, I made a decision. I was tired of playing defense. My parents had controlled the narrative for too long. I still had access to my social media accounts. They probably forgot I even had them since I rarely posted. I wrote a long post about everything that had happened. The divorce, the lies, finding the documents, the forged signatures, all of it. I didn't use their real names, but anyone who knew our family would understand. Within an hour, the post had dozens of comments. Friends from school were shocked. Some of my parents' friends reached out asking if it was true. My mom's sister called Grandma demanding to know what was going on. She'd had no idea about any of this. The truth was spreading fast. My parents had worked so hard to seem like the perfect divorced couple who put their kid first. Now everyone knew the truth. My phone started ringing nonstop. My parents, their partners, even some relatives I barely knew. I didn't answer any of them, but I did read the texts. They ranged from angry to pleading to threatening. My dad said I'd ruined his reputation. My mom said I'd never understand the damage I'd done. Good. They deserved to feel some of the pain they'd caused me. That evening, something unexpected happened. Our neighbor, Mrs. Kayla, called Grandma. She lived across from my dad's house and had seen everything over the years. She said she was willing to testify about what she'd witnessed if it would help. The times she'd seen me home alone for hours while my parents were out with their new partners, the arguments she'd overheard, the moving trucks that had already started showing up before I found out about their plans. More people came forward over the next few days. My English teacher called to say she'd noticed changes in my behavior recently and was concerned. The parent who carpooled with us said my mom had mentioned boarding school months ago like it was already decided. Even Heather officially offered to testify about what she'd overheard while cleaning. My parents had been so confident in their plan they'd gotten sloppy. Walter was building a strong case. Between the forged documents, the witness statements, and the false CPS report, my parents looked terrible. He filed for emergency temporary guardianship for Grandma. The hearing was set for Wednesday. He said judges didn't like granting these, but we had a shot given the circumstances. I tried not to get my hopes up, but it was hard not to feel optimistic. Tuesday night, I couldn't eat dinner. The hearing was tomorrow and everything depended on it. If we lost, I'd have to go back to my parents. They'd ship me off to boarding school before the week was out. Grandma tried to reassure me, but I could see she was nervous too. We went to bed early, but I stared at the ceiling for hours. Tomorrow would change everything one way or another. The courthouse was bigger than I expected. All glass and marble and echoey hallways. My parents were already there with their lawyer when we arrived. They wouldn't look at me. Their new partners were there too, sitting behind them. Sandra kept checking her phone. Nathan was reading some business magazine. They looked bored, like this was just another inconvenient appointment. The hearing started at 10 a.m. sharp. The judge was an older woman with gray hair pulled back tight. She looked tired already. Walter presented our case first. He laid out everything with the forged documents and the witness statements. He showed the texts from my parents about their secret plans. The judge examined each piece of evidence carefully, occasionally asking questions. My parents' lawyer tried to spin it differently. He said this was all a misunderstanding and that teenagers often overreact to change. He claimed Grandma was turning me against my parents. The judge asked him about the forged signatures directly. He stammered something about mistaken identity and unclear documentation. Even he didn't seem to believe what he was saying. Then came the testimony. Mrs. Kayla went first. She talked about seeing me home alone constantly while my parents were out. She mentioned the time she found me sitting on the front porch at midnight because I'd locked myself out and couldn't reach either parent. My mom's face went red at that. The judge took notes the whole time. Heather testified next about what she'd overheard while cleaning. The arguments about shipping me away. The comments about how much easier life would be without a kid around. She even remembered specific dates and times. My dad's lawyer tried to object, saying it was hearsay, but the judge allowed it. She seemed very interested in what Heather had to say. My English teacher spoke about the changes she'd noticed in my behavior and grades. How I'd gone from a happy kid to withdrawn and anxious. She'd tried reaching out to my parents, but they'd never returned her calls. She brought my essays from the past year showing the decline. One was about family traditions. The recent one was about feeling invisible. The false CPS report came up next. The judge was not happy about that. She asked my parents directly if they'd made the call. They denied it, but phone records Walter had gotten showed the call came from my mom's cell. The judge's face got stern. She said false reports wasted resources and hurt real cases. My mom started crying, but it felt fake to me. Finally, it was my turn to speak. The judge asked me directly where I wanted to live. I told her about finding the documents and realizing my parents had been planning this for months. I talked about how they'd said I ruined their marriage and they never wanted kids. My voice cracked a few times, but I got through it. The judge asked if I felt safe with Grandma. I said it was the first time I'd felt safe in years. My parents wanted to respond, but their lawyer advised against it. Probably smart since they'd already made things worse every time they opened their mouths. The judge said she'd review everything and make a decision within 48 hours. Court was adjourned. We all filed out in awkward silence. Outside the courthouse, my dad approached me. Sandra tried to hold him back, but he shrugged her off. He said this didn't have to be so ugly and we could still work something out. I just stared at him. Did he really think I'd fall for that now? Grandma stepped between us and told him to communicate through lawyers only. He looked like he wanted to argue, but Sandra dragged him away. The next 2 days crawled by. I tried to distract myself with homework and TV, but nothing worked. Grandma baked enough cookies to feed an army. Neither of us could eat much. Walter called a few times with updates, but there wasn't much to say. We just had to wait. I must have refreshed my email 1,000 times, even though Walter said he'd call the moment he heard anything. Thursday afternoon, the call finally came. Walter sounded excited, which had to be good. The judge had granted temporary guardianship to Grandma. The house sale was permanently blocked. My parents were ordered to pay Grandma's legal fees. They also had to attend counseling if they wanted any future custody consideration. I collapsed on the couch in relief. It was over. At least this part was. Grandma and I cried and hugged for probably 10 minutes. She called Walter back to get more details. The judge had written a scathing opinion about parents who put their own desires above their child's well-being. She'd specifically mentioned the forged documents and false CPS report as showing a pattern of deception. My parents had 60 days to appeal, but Walter said they had no grounds. That night, we ordered Chinese food to celebrate. It was the first meal I'd actually tasted in weeks. We even got fortune cookies. Mine said, "A new chapter begins with courage." Grandma's said, "Family is what you make it." We laughed at how weirdly appropriate they were. For the first time in months, I felt like maybe things would actually be okay. The next morning, I woke up to dozens of texts. Word had gotten out about the ruling. Most were supportive messages from friends and family. A few were nasty ones from my parents' friends saying I destroyed a family. I deleted those without responding. My aunt called to apologize for not seeing the signs sooner. She offered to help however she could. My parents went silent after the ruling. No calls, no texts, no showing up at the door. It was eerie, but also peaceful. I started at my new school the following Monday. It was weird being the new kid, but also kind of nice. Nobody knew my drama. I could just be normal for a while. I made friends with a kid named Elijah in my math class who liked the same video games. 2 weeks later, Heather texted me again. She'd been cleaning the house and my parents were packing. Apparently, they'd decided to move anyway, just separately. My dad was still going to Florida with Sandra. My mom was moving in with Nathan across town. The house would stay in the family, but sit empty for now. It felt weird knowing they were really leaving. Walter filed paperwork to make Grandma's guardianship permanent. My parents didn't contest it. They'd apparently decided fighting was too expensive expensive and damaging to their reputations. Part of me was hurt they gave up so easily, but mostly I was relieved. The constant battle was exhausting. Maybe now we could all move on. A month after the hearing, my mom reached out. She sent a long email apologizing for what she'd said that night. She claimed she didn't mean it and was just angry and scared. She wanted to meet for coffee to talk. I stared at that email for hours. Grandma said it was my choice, but to be careful. I decided to wait. I wasn't ready to forgive yet. My dad never apologized. He sent a birthday card 2 months later with a generic message and a check. No personal note or anything. I cashed the check and donated the money to a youth shelter downtown. It felt good to turn something from him into help for other kids going through hard times. Grandma said she was proud of me. The house situation got resolved eventually. Since Grandma was part owner and I'd inherit my dad's portion someday, we decided to rent it out. The income would go into a college fund for me. It felt right that the house that nearly tore our family apart would instead help build my future. Walter found good tenants, a young family with twin daughters. I visited the house one last time before the renters moved in. It looked exactly the same, but felt completely different. The dining room where everything exploded was just a room now. My bedroom where I'd cried myself to sleep was empty and echoey. I grabbed a few things I'd forgotten, but mostly I just said goodbye. This wasn't my home anymore. 6 months later, I was doing okay. Not great, but okay. I had friends at school and my grades were back up. Grandma and I had settled into a routine. She gave me more freedom than my parents ever had, but also clearer boundaries. We ate dinner together every night and talked about our days. It was nice having someone actually interested in my life. The anniversary of the confrontation dinner came around faster than expected. I'd been dreading it, but when the day came, it was just another Tuesday. Grandma made spaghetti for dinner, not as a cruel joke, but because she forgot the significance. We laughed about it later. Sometimes the best way to deal with bad memories is to make new ones. My mom kept reaching out every few weeks. Always emails, never calls. She updated me on her life with Nathan like I'd asked for the information. They were engaged now. She invited me to the wedding. I didn't respond to that one either. My dad sent occasional texts about the weather in Florida and his new boat. Surface level stuff. Neither of them tried to rebuild an actual relationship. I started seeing a therapist to work through everything. She helped me understand that my parents' issues weren't my fault. They'd been unhappy long before making their plan. I was just easier to blame than accepting their own failures. It didn't excuse what they did, but it helped me stop blaming myself. Slowly, I began to heal. Senior year started, and college applications loomed. Grandma and I toured schools together. She'd never gotten to do that with my dad since he'd gone straight to work. She was living vicariously through me, and I didn't mind. We had fun road tripping to different campuses and trying local food. It felt like the family trips I'd missed out on. I got into my top choice school 3 hours away, far enough to be independent, but close enough to come home for Sunday dinners. Grandma cried when the acceptance came. Happy tears this time. She'd been saving money for years, hoping to help with college. Between that and the rental income, I wouldn't need loans. My parents' betrayal had accidentally set me up for success. Graduation day arrived, and I'd invited my parents. Not because I'd forgiven them, but because I wanted them to see what they'd missed. They both came, sitting separately with their new partners. They looked uncomfortable being in the same room. Meanwhile, I was surrounded by friends, teachers who'd supported me, and of course Grandma in the front row. After the ceremony, my mom approached cautiously. She congratulated me and said she was proud. I thanked her politely and turned to take pictures with friends. She stood there for a moment, looking lost, then walked away. My dad waved from across the gym, but didn't come over. Sandra whispered something to him and they left. It was probably our last interaction for a while. That summer before college, I helped clean out Grandma's attic. We found boxes of old photos from when my dad was young, pictures of family vacations and birthday parties and normal happy moments. Grandma asked if I wanted any. I picked out a few from before everything went wrong, not because I missed those times, but as reminders that even good things can end if you're not careful. The night before I left for college, Grandma made my favorite meal. We sat at her kitchen table where so many important conversations had happened. She told me she was proud of how I'd handled everything, that I'd shown more maturity than adults twice my age. She also said my parents might reach out once I was at college, that I should handle it however felt right to me. I moved into my dorm on a sunny August day. Grandma helped me unpack and set up my room. She'd bought me new bedding and a mini fridge. My roommate seemed nice, a kid named Steven from 2 states over. As Grandma hugged me goodbye, she slipped an envelope into my hand. Inside was a letter telling me how much she loved me and how I'd saved her from a lonely retirement. 2 weeks into freshman year, I got a text from an unknown number. It was my dad saying he hoped college was going well. I stared at it for a while, then deleted it. Maybe someday I'd be ready to reconnect, but not yet. I had a new life to build first, one where I chose my own family instead of being stuck with the one I was born into. Looking back now, that dinner I'd planned to reunite my parents had actually saved me. If I hadn't found those documents, I'd be at some boarding school right now. My parents would have sold the house and moved on with their lives. Instead, I got to stay with someone who actually wanted me around. Sometimes the worst nights lead to the best outcomes. I still live with Grandma during school breaks. We've redecorated my room and planted a garden out back. The rental income from the old house covers my expenses and then some. My parents send birthday cards and holiday texts, but that's about it. Their new partners have kids of their own now. I'm happy for them, sort of. At least those kids were actually wanted. Friends ask if I miss my parents. The truth is, I miss who I thought they were. The loving couple who had me on purpose and built a life together. But those people never existed. The real them were selfish and dishonest and willing to throw me away for convenience. I don't miss those people at all. Grandma's shown me what real family looks like, so that's my story. Parents tried to secretly ship me off to boarding school and sell my childhood home. I found out, exposed their lies, and ended up living with my grandma who actually gives a damn about me. Not the reunion I'd planned, but definitely the one I needed. To anyone else dealing with family betrayal, document everything and find your real support system. Blood doesn't always mean family. Oh, and that fancy boarding school in Florida my dad picked out? It shut down last year for financial fraud. Guess he wasn't great at research either. I laughed when I saw the news article. Grandma baked a cake to celebrate the irony. We ate the whole thing while watching movies. It was a good night.